This is Cup of Go for February 20th, 2023. Keep up to date with the important happenings in the Go community in just 15 minutes per week. I'm your co-host, Shai Nechmad.
And I'm your other co-host, Jonathan Hall.
And we both have our hot cup of coffees for this one, luckily. Nice. So let's jump into this week's news. We have a lot of topics to talk about and a really great interview after the break.
Yes, I'm looking forward to the interview. I haven't heard it yet. I know you did it when I wasn't able to join.
So, Jonathan, what are the latest releases?
Right off the press, of course, we already talked about this last week. Go 120.1 and 1.19.6 have been released. We didn't know what was in them last week because they were security patches. Now we know. It's a large collection of security things. I don't know that anything really stands out. There's a couple of denial of service attack options. Large handshakes can cause a panic in TLS, a whole bunch of things. Go read the release notes if you're really curious. But the TLDR, just upgrade. Make sure you're on the latest version.
Yeah, one thing I liked was how you can exploit a vulnerability by creating a malformed TIFF image.
Yeah.
Which just consumes a ton of memory.
Yeah.
I thought it was a pretty cool vulnerability. And also, it was discovered by open source fuzzing, which was pretty cool. Becoming a more and more prevalent tool in vulnerability research if you're into that kind of thing.
So upgrade from to Go 1.20.1, 1.19.6. And if you're using the golang.org/x/image and /TIFF packages, upgrade to version 0.5.0 of those. Related on the same topic, LabStack Echo released a new point release 4.10.1, which just imports those new packages and a few other minor bug fixes. But if you're an Echo user, make sure you update there too to get those latest security fixes.
And other than the security fixes, there's also a release to TinyGo.
Yeah, TinyGo 0.27.0 has been released. If you're not familiar, TinyGo it's a subset of Go, and it compiles down to really small binaries primarily for embedded systems. And they released a new version, 0.27.0, which adds support for Go 1.20, LLVM 15, and a whole bunch of other improvements. The changelog was really long, so if you're into embedded stuff, go check that out.
And closely related to that, this week I stumbled upon PureGo via the Go weekly newsletter, which if you like our show, we recommend you subscribe to. So PureGo just released an alpha version of 0.2. I don't think it's the most stable project on the planet, but it's really, really cool for calling C functions without CGo. It was developed for a game engine that only uses Go and only uses Windows and blah, blah, blah. But it does seem like it has a lot of benefits if you need to interop C and Go and you don't want to use CGo, which is pretty interesting. Also released, I think, this week.
Nice. Very cool. And what do we have in the news for upcoming changes?
There's an accepted proposal. I think it follows the usual, something is developed by the community, and then it's developed in experimental, and then the language spec sort of rises up to meet it, and then it finally gets accepted into the standard library. This time is for slices. There's a new standard library package that's based on experimental slices that has quite a lot of useful APIs. Equal and equal with a function. Compare and compare with a function. So basically, these two functions take slices and compare them, check if they're equal. Underneath the hood, they use the comparable type, which is also something that was discussed this week. In Go 120, there is a whole new set of underlying mechanisms to make the comparable type work. It's pretty heady and complicated. I tried to read the blog post and I had to reread it a few times. So I'm honestly 100% sure that we can't do it justice in this podcast. So I'm just going to go ahead and tell the people to jump into the show notes and see the blog post by Rob Grismer. It sort of explains why map from any to string would work, but a generic lookup table from any to comparable wouldn't work. And then how in Go 120 that would work again. So if you're into programming languages as a thing, I think you're going to like this blog post. And if you just want your things to work, just upgrade to Go 120 and they're just going to work. So I think based on top of that proposal, a lot of the features that the proposed API for the new standard slices package is going to work pretty well. And the proposal is really well written. It's closed already because it's been accepted. if you want to read it, go ahead and check out the link in the show notes as well.
So we can probably expect that in 1.21, I would imagine.
I hope so. It doesn't sound like it's a lot of work, but since the comparable type is kind of new, they might discover some edge cases around it.
And then you might recall 2 weeks ago we mentioned that a similar maps package had been that proposal had been accepted. So we should have some great new maps and slice utility functions in the new standard library. Hopefully in 1.21.
Yeah, honestly, anyone who's been working with these data types in a large enough project already has dumped in some, /utils/ why isn't this in the standard library.go file somewhere?
That'll be a fun PR with all the red lines in it.
Yeah. All right, so we have some interesting libraries released and tools released this week, both relating to data.
The first one on the list, it's not really a new release exactly, but the go-redis package. If you've been using Redis in Go, you've probably been using go-redis, which was hosted at github.com/go-redis/redis, and then V8 for the latest version. Well, Redis has officially adopted this library now as their official package. So it's no longer just a community-driven effort. It's now part of the official thing, which means it gets better support and a new version number. So the new import path is github.com/redis/go-redis/v9. So just take that go-redis and revert them, and you have the new import path. And then add v9, because you kind of have to do that when you change something. So,
and the API for Redis, if you have used Redis in other languages in the past, and you're considering using Redis in Go, the API is honestly really great. It's well designed. It gives you really good and transparent access into Redis, and it doesn't attempt to be a heavy ORM. I highly recommend it. We're using it at Reco at work, and it works pretty well. Other than go-redis, there's another tool relating to data that's been released. Generally, seeing a trend of a lot of data-related things. On our last episode, we interviewed someone about Apache Arrow, Matthew Topple, which is also a data thing in Go. And in general, it seems like there's a ton of community and even enterprise effort around Go and data science and data engineering, which is great to see. It's not just a HTTP server library anymore. So one tool that's been very useful, it's a CLI called Plumber, which is a dev tool for your CLI to inspect and pipe and message and redirect data for basically Kafka, RabbitMQ, PubSubs, etc. If you have, Kafka or any equivalent system for PubSub and messaging set up in your company in production, you probably have some scripts, right? Trying to read it, trying to write into it for tests, and just for debugging on production if you have to, or in your dev environments. This is just sort of a Swiss Army knife for working with your messaging systems, which sometimes can be a little hidden. They are a little too backend-y for my tastes. A little harder to inspect than a DB, and very temporal. It also works really well with Protobuf, which is great for if you're using Protobuf like me. It works really well. You just have to import your files correctly, which is always a pain when you're using a Protobuf anyway. And they have had a really recent release 4 days ago, and it seems like a very alive project right now. Their major release, the one where that brought them to our attention, was the 2.0.0 release 2 weeks ago, where the company behind Plumber changed their name to streamdial.com. And, supported a ton of features and bug fixes and stuff like that, including dead letter queues, which is obviously useful if you want to inspect what went wrong and not what went right.
Yep. Very cool.
Yeah, interesting stuff. What else? What else happened in the community?
Yeah, so you may recall, was it a week ago or 2 weeks ago, we mentioned that Gorilla Toolkit had been effectively deprecated, archived. It's still available, but it's no longer going to be getting any updates. So that raises a question, what should you use instead? And there's been an interesting conversation over on Reddit about specifically the Gorilla session package. Gorilla is it's not really a framework. It's more of a collection of tools related to various aspects of web stuff. And the session one in particular got this thread going on Reddit that has 80 comments in total. But it's a really good conversation if you're wondering what should you do instead of your Gorilla session. Well, the TLDR is write your own. It's about 100 lines of code, unless there's always a caveat. Unless you have some interesting needs like single sign-on or more complex than just I need a cookie and I need to tie it to some data in a database.
I found that usually these sort of threads, and this one is no different, are separated into 3 camps. The first one is it works, don't touch it. Who cares if Gorilla Toolkit was archived or unmaintained? The code is there. It's still alive. Just use it. Who cares? Mm-hmm. The second group is, oh, you can do it in an hour. It's very simple. It's just a cookie. It's just text. It's just bytes. What's the problem? Just write your own. And the third camp is, here's a shiny new thing, untitled dot shiny new thing, point, open parentheses, 100.
My GitHub gist. Download this.
Yeah. And like always, it's very situational. I think that for this specific case, if you heard the news about Gorilla Toolkit and you're sad, you're probably good for like another year to just forget about it and use the archive thing. And then when new security vulnerabilities are going to pop up and they're not going to be maintained, you're just going to have to write your own and hope that in the 12 months since you made that decision, someone wrote a really short, concise, small library just for this use case and not a huge toolkit that requires maintainers, etc.
Certainly there are other packages that serve the same purpose, but at least in my experience, they serve much more than just this purpose. Like LabStack Echo I mentioned earlier. It does this for you, but you kind of have to adopt the whole Echo framework. You can't just plug in a session manager. So I think if I were using this, let me first say I haven't been using Gorilla Sessions since the context package was released in Go 1.7 because it uses a clever mechanism to handle contexts. But it's kind of ugly. It uses unsafe and stuff like that. So I stopped using it a long time ago in the first place for that very reason. But if you're still using it, and many people are, I've worked on recent projects that are still using it, I think I would kind of do what I just said. I might fork it if I wanted to, but I would keep using the existing code. The reason I would fork it is because it's then easier for me to update dependencies and fix anything if I need to. But if it ain't broke, don't fix it is kind of my philosophy.
And I think, adding to your philosophy, also doing what Shai said, is generally good advice. So other than that, running out the news, there's one interesting talk that was done at FOSDEM, which you talked about, but you didn't get to go there because you had a commitment.
Right.
Obviously, there were a bunch of great talks, like at every conference, and thanks to anyone who got on stage and tried to share with the community what they know. One interesting talk that at least caught my attention was Etienne from Weaviate, talking about building a database in Go, which it starts with the normal. What's the motivation? What are we building, et cetera, but really, really, really jumps quickly into super low-level garbage collection, profiling, and performance stuff. So if you're interested in stuff like that, if you're interested, for example, in the memory arenas, discussion we had a few episodes ago in Go 20, I think you would find this talk very interesting. Less than 10 minutes in, Etienne goes super hard with, parsing 1 billion numbers takes 26 seconds. How can we afford that? Let's see how much time was spent on garbage collection and stuff we don't actually care about. And also, thanks to the Reddit community giving us another point of reference to talk about, that's how I got to this talk, because it seems like people on Golang Reddit really liked it as well. And nice work, Etienne. I think it's a great talk.
Right.
Just to round out, Golang CI Lint 1.51.2 was released. It shows you how on top of this show is 11 hours ago. A lot of bumps for dependencies, which is important, and one fix for cache status size calculation, which is important, and one configuration change for GoVet, which will probably make a lot of people happy because they disabled that rule. So if you have in the back of your mind, I disabled the time format thing on GoVet, upgrade and then undisable it.
Yes. We're about the 15-minute mark, which is our promise to the community to get the news to them in 15 minutes per week.
All right. So I think it's time for an ad break.
See you on the other side. Well, welcome to our amazing ad break. Shai, we have a sponsor this week. Would you tell us about them?
Thanks to our sponsors, Keep. Keep is an open source alerting tool built by the developers for developers. You can find them at keephq.dev. They're good friends of the show. If you or your team suffer from alert fatigue, you want to improve the alerts you're getting, and you want to join in on a super exciting, super young project. The repository was opened this week, already used by 164 people, starred almost 700 times, and forked 12 times. If you want to join this community as it's growing, and take a look at Keep. It's a simple CLI tool that contains everything you need to start creating and managing alerts. With a lot of ready-to-use providers, you can configure and trigger and test your alerts, and it should be pretty easily deployable. And my favorite part, the alerts themselves are simple files, YAML files, human-readable, that sit within Git, obviously developed by developers who like code. So thank you to KeepHQ Dev.
Did I just hear you say that YAML is human readable?
You know what? I'll take that back. It's more human readable than other options.
Okay.
And it's in Git, which is, I would prefer over many other things, as long as it's source controlled.
Fair enough.
So thanks to our sponsors, Keep. So other than our sponsor, we have a formatting note for this episode about how we're going to structure the episodes going forward.
Yeah. So last week we asked for the community to give some feedback about the episode format, because we've had a little bit of talk from community, primarily on our Slack channel over on the Gopher Slack, Go, Kebab Case, if you want to join, about the interview versus the news. So we asked for your opinion. We got about 9 or 10 responses, and we did some number crunching. We looked at some analytics, and we talked about it amongst ourselves. And we came to the big, exciting conclusion that for the moment, we're not really going to change anything.
Thank you for joining this pointless exercise.
Yeah. No, the truth is we really do value your feedback. And we did talk about this hard. We considered about 4 or 5 different options. But at the end of the day, the biggest feedback we got was that there's a certain group of people who really like the news and they don't want the interview. And we appreciate that. So our intention is to make it just black and white, night and day clear when the news is over, so you can, in your pod player, you can just skip the rest of the episode if you want to. And that's the intention.
We won't be insulted, we promise.
Yeah, exactly. You're not going to hurt our feelings if you don't listen to us interview people. So that's a relatively easy problem to solve. That seems easier than creating either 2 podcasts or 2 episodes in the same podcast or whatever. On the other hand, we can imagine easily that there might be some people, especially in the future, who only want to listen to the interviews. We think this might be most likely in 6 months or a year.
As the news gets stale, but the interviews stay golden.
Right. So what we would like to do, if that describes you, if you're interested in only the interviews, at least on some episodes, let us know. And we'll consider splitting those episodes, the interviews, out into maybe another podcast, maybe Cup of Go interviews or something like that, where you can get just the interviews of older shows. But for now, to keep our volunteer efforts as light as possible and to satisfy the majority of the listeners as possible, we're going to keep our format essentially the same, but we're going to try to make that break between the news and the interview a little more obvious, so you don't miss it if you're driving or jogging down the street or something like that and you're not paying close attention.
Thank you to the community members for helping us do some bike shedding. We really do appreciate your feedback. There are a few people who reached out to us on Slack or via the survey or on DMs. They want to say thank you to. And we're going to butcher your names, so we're going to go really, really quickly, one by one. So Andres Arpi.
You got to do this. I can't do this one. Ladislav.
You got it.
Enough vowels in there. I don't know how to say that.
I would say Preskovec.
Sorry, Ladislav, if we butchered your name. I'm sure we did.
We really appreciate your feedback. Chaim Levary and Meir Blumenfeld, thanks a lot.
Joe Davidson, Simon Tour,
Theo Silvo,
and Tom Toledo, and everyone else we forgot to mention.
If you do want to reach us, so there are a few ways to do that. Cupogo.dev is our domain. As Jonathan mentioned, in the Gopher Slacks, we have a channel where all this discussion took place. Hashtag #CupOgo, kebab case with hyphens. Or you can email us at news@cupogo.dev. If you don't like the show, then let us know. Swear at us. We appreciate any feedback. But if you like the show, please leave a review on Spotify, or iTunes, or wherever you catch your podcasts. It helps out a lot. And also share this episode, with your coworkers or co-students or, your other gophers in your area. Stick around if you want to. If you're not, this is your chance. People who are driving and want to stop listening to the interviews. But if you are interested in this week's interview, we're interviewing Daniel Nephin. And actually, it was just me because Jonathan was not available.
Yeah.
But a really cool interview about open source, testing, Go Test Some and Go Test tools, and just how Daniel was able to maintain open source contributions over a long period of time. He's a great guy, a really interesting interview. Another short programming note. Next week's episode is going to be Jonathan alone. I'm not going to be here.
I'm going to try to fly solo, see if I can do it by myself.
Today we have with us Daniel, I hope I'm saying it correctly, Nephin?
Yep. That's me.
Hi, Daniel. Great
Hello.
to have you on the show.
Thanks. Great to be here.
To listeners who might not have listened to our second episode, or even the first one, I don't remember in which one, we mentioned in the news section an open source project, a really useful one, which you might have heard of, called Go Test Some. If you haven't heard about it, you're going to learn about it more now. And just scrolling through GitHub, looking at the release and seeing who did it, we stumbled onto Daniel's GitHub profile, which was, if you imagine the GitHub page, you have that quilt of commits. It was fully green. And we knew just then that we really want to reach out to Daniel. We did, and he agreed to join us on the show. So thanks a lot. To people who don't know you, who are you? What do you do?
My name's Daniel. I've been a Go software engineer for the last 7 years. I've been fortunate to contribute projects like Docker Compose, Docker Engine, HashiCorp Console. Also, I had the opportunity to contribute to CircleCI's build platform whenever I worked there. So really enjoy working in Go, really enjoy working in open source, and happy to be here to chat about it.
Thanks. So basically, all our developer audiences, I would say about 50% are running your code, even if they don't know about it.
Probably between Docker Compose and Docker and Go Test Some, yeah.
All right, so I would actually love to delve into Go Test Yourself and Go Test Some first. So what is Go Test Some? How did it came to be?
Yeah, so Go Test Some is a tool for running tests, and it doesn't try to replace all of what Go Test already does. Go Test already does a lot of great stuff. What it tries to be is a layer on top with a few extra features that some people might want. So it uses in Go 1.10, they added a -JSON flag to the Go Test command, and what that let people do is they got a JSON output of all of the events that from the Go Test runner. And so what I did with that is I wrote a tool that consumed all that JSON and solved a bunch of problems that I had at the time. So at the time I was working at Docker. The Docker engine had a huge test suite. It ran in Jenkins, gave out lots of log output. So whenever you had a test failure, it was pretty difficult to go and find exactly all of the relevant log lines mixed into like thousands. I forget if it was tens of thousands of these log lines. It was really difficult to debug these failures. I believe they were running with Go Test-V because they wanted to integrate with Jenkins, which needs the JUnit XML. And the way to do that at the time was you pipe all of that verbose output into another tool that kind of generated that XML for you. And so I saw that. I was coming from Python, and I was like, I was using this PyTest tool in Python, and it was great. It did these summaries at the end. It told you how many failed, how many skipped, color-coded a few things. I was like, I mean, we've got this JSON flag now. Why not do something a little bit better for our use case? So the first thing I did was I put this tool together with it let you output the JUnit XML without having to pipe all the output through a tool. So kind of just wrote it out to a file. The output to standard out could be a customizable format. So I kept the standard Go Test and Go Test verbose formats, but also added a few kind of more compact ones that included a bit of color.
before you go into how it developed, first help me settle a debate.
Sure.
That's raging internally within my team, and I'm sure every Go test some user has. Which one's the correct one? Dots, package name, or test name? Which one are you using?
Yeah, you know what? I don't have a good answer to that. So the reason that I put multiple formats in was that I thought, depending on where you're running tests, you might want something a little bit different, and depending on how large your test suite is, you might want something a little different. So personally, I use test name format for local development. Local development, always test name format. I really like that format. I can talk more about it later, but I usually only run tests for a single package, so it doesn't make sense to use the other ones. In CI, I'll often also use test name format, but I can see the appeal of using package name in CI. If you've got a lot of packages, you may not want to scroll through thousands of lines of the test names. But yeah, definitely personally, test name.
All right, so sorry, I cut you off there. I just had to settle the debate within my team. I'm uncomfortable admitting how much of the effort of setting up the podcast and setting up the interview was just to settle petty debates with fellow developers. So you're starting to say how you set up a few formats and set up the JUnit file output as part of the work in Docker Compose because it has a huge test suite.
Docker Engine, actually, yeah, exactly. Because at the time Docker Compose was written in Python. That's changed since. Yeah, and the third thing that we really needed was make it easier to find the lines relevant to the test failure. So a big thing go-test-sum does, the sum part of it stands for summary, and so at the very end, you run all your tests, it'll print out the output of the failed test, the output of the skipped tests. If there are any build errors, one package fails out of 20, it becomes really hard to find those build errors, prints out those build errors, and then a line at the bottom just kind of summarizing the whole thing, saying total number of tests, runtime, number of failed, skipped, errored, yeah.
Considering it's, a utility above GoTest, it has, I think, a surprising amount of users for something that's so simple, or stars. A lot of the Gophers I talk to just, of course, just run, every time they see me run GoTest, they're like, oh, GoTest some? Like, yeah, I haven't installed it yet or whatever. But one thing that I find interesting is you still support it. You're talking about something that started many years ago, and the most recent release was on January 14th. With still relevant features, not just security vulnerabilities fixes. So are you still using it yourself? Do you get feedback from the community? How does the action around the GoTest sum look like?
Yeah, I definitely still use it myself. So for local development, I use the watch flag, --watch. And so what that does is it sits there and listens to file system notifications. So every time I save a file, it automatically runs the tests, all of the tests for that package where the file was in. I'm really big, I want really quick feedback loops. I do some rough version of test-driven development, and so that ability to just compile the package and run the test for the package, get me feedback in somewhere between a second and 5 seconds, really valuable for me whenever I'm doing work. So I use it every single day. And I also, most teams I've worked on are very happy to use it in CI as well. Better integration, easier to debug failures. But to answer the other part of your question, where do the features come from? Definitely, I could talk a little bit more about it, but every time I changed roles, I'd land on a team and I'd be like, there's a couple more things I could add here to deal with the problems that this team happens to be having, right? Everyone doesn't have the same problems. So I went to Circle CI and there was some more local development features I added. I went to HashiCorp and it was okay, this console's a very old project. It's had a huge community of people contributing to it, and the test suite was not the most reliable. There were some flaky tests there, right? So it's we don't want every developer to have to constantly be struggling with these flaky tests. Let's find a way to prioritize the most flaky ones and allow everyone else to just get their work done without rerunning stuff. So yeah, I'd say it's a combination of problems I've felt personally, and then people come to the issue tracker. They'll be like, "Hey, I'm trying to do this." And I'd be like, "Awesome! Let me see what we can do, what we can get in there." I don't always have the opportunity to jump in and develop every feature, but I'll at the very least try to be like, "This sounds great." If you were looking to contribute, maybe try out something along these lines, I'd be happy to review it.
That's really cool. You say every organization you got to had slightly different issues, but I think it speaks to how Go thinks that you were able to, that all these teams just ran Go tests. And if the projects you were jumping between were, I'm not here to shit about other languages, right? But if they were Python, you could have ended up with one team doing unit test, one team doing PyTest, one team doing Mocha, and like whatever. And carrying over the Go test some bag of tricks between and improving it along the way wouldn't have been possible without something so standardized and baked into the tool chain.
Absolutely. I feel like the Go tool chain does an amazing job of making sure it's got like a very robust standard set of features that are going to make it so that no one has to go and write a Go test runner that actually does all of the complexity of Go test, because it's provided a very nice foundation to build stuff on top of.
100%. If you want to check out Go test some, if you're not using it already, you should just use it. It's very, very, very useful. I can personally attest. Then go check it out on GitHub. Go test yourself/Go test some. The link is also going to be in the show notes. Let's talk about Go test yourself and the rest of your very greenish contribution in GitHub. It definitely looks like you're doing a ton of open source work. How much of that work is hobby stuff that you do for yourself, and how much of it is corporate open source stuff that you actually do as part of your job?
That's a good question. I haven't gone and measured it. I think a good chunk of it is for my job. Working at Infra is open source, and so a good number of the commits there are from that. I'm the type of person that uses Git for just about everything, so I have like notes that I take for like daily, like, okay, what do I do today? What am I doing tomorrow? That all gets checked into a private repo in Git, so that's a few more of them. Some of it's open source, but yeah, I've even used Git as like a backup system for like save files for video games. Some number of those boxes are definitely just kind of automated things getting pushed as a backup system. But I don't know, probably like 70% day job and 30% open source hobby. Sorry.
I think this is really, an interesting point. And recently, not in the Go community, but actually in the JavaScript community, I think it really flared up because of Core.js. I don't know if you saw that article. But the maintainer behind Core.js, which is like a super huge, like, I forgot the name, it's like Babel. It makes your JavaScript code work on all browsers, even though they all have slightly different standards and slightly different bugs. It's a huge product and very complicated. Apparently, it's all maintained by one guy who has a lot of issues. I don't really want to get into it. It's very politically charged and personally charged, and I don't know the story, but he's been doing it on his own dime, getting some Patreon and getting whatever. Couldn't get a corporation behind it. What you told us sounds like a lot of healthy ways to do it. Like, here's a company, I solve a problem, but I do it as an open source and I give it back to the community, and then it stays alive and it comes with me.
Yeah.
Everybody wins, right? Whoever hires you get a great tool to come along with it. The community enjoys it. Sounds like the perfect combination model, at least in my view. And I'm happy that you've been able to do it, because I've been using it for free, and until today haven't heard about you at all. So it's just been a faceless tool in my CLI for the last couple of years. Other than GoTestSum, there's also GoTest.tools. Can you elaborate a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. So it's not nearly as popular, for sure. But as I mentioned, I came from Python, and Python had this PyTest framework, and it actually had both the test runner and it had a framework in there for doing for assertions. And so the GoTest.tools is kind of inspired by the other side of that PyTest stuff. So there are tools in there for golden files. I'd never heard the name myself, but the idea is you have the expected value of a test stored in a file, and it's a kind of convenient way of being like, okay, compare the actual result to this file. And, that's easy enough to do with a library. The nice thing it brings along is you can just run -update, and it'll auto-write that expected value, auto-update it for you. There's actually a cool project in the community called hexops val ast that tries to do that very same thing, but for any expected value. So it'll like rewrite your source code for you. Haven't used that much, but there's some other cool stuff out there. But yeah, the general idea of this go-test.tools project is that kind of thing. Small packages to handle kind of very specific use cases. So there's another one in there for running Linux commands, running commands as part of an integration test. There's one in there for working with the file system, either building up complex expectations of, okay, this file and directory with these permissions, and also creating that as a test data fixture for a test. And then there's an assertion library. I know assertion library is very controversial in Go, but what I will say is, I think the Go team in the frequently asked questions for Go had some comments about assertions, why they didn't like it, and I honestly think they're right. So what we did, again, I was working at Docker at the time, and what we did, we had 3 different assertion frameworks, and what we did is like, okay, this is the cautionary tale from the Go team. Can we build an assertion library that tries as much as possible to avoid these landmines, right? And I think I personally feel like we did a pretty good job. But not going to try to push assertions on anyone because I know there's not everyone's a fan.
So that's actually leads me to my next question. Both GoTestSum and some parts of GoTest tools seem to me like natural contenders for let's take these very useful and popular and at this point battle tested tools and propose them to the standard library. On the other hand, it's not a very Linuxy small tools that connect together nicely via pipe approach. Do you see something like that happening? Like your code ending up in the in the Go standard toolchain, or do you think it's not a good fit?
I suspect that what exists in GoTest tools and GoTestSum right now would not be a drop-in good fit for the standard library. I think there have been proposals for the Go toolchain to do more with GoTest. I think it's nice to have a very small, robust, but like fairly limited feature set in the Go library to build on top of. Not everyone has a use case that benefits from GoTestSum, right? People have different workflows. Their orgs do different things for CI. And having it be a community project is kind of nice because it lets you experiment. The bar for getting a feature into GoTestSum is orders of magnitude lower than getting a feature into the Go toolchain, and it lets us experiment, right? And I think it's a safe enough place to experiment and try things out and solve use cases and see where it goes. On the library side, the GoTest tools side, it's interesting because there's another. The assertions rely heavily on a Go comp package that I think got built by the Google Cloud team, I believe. And there's another library out there, I'm forgetting the name of, assertion library, that kind of started up at almost the exact same time. You also used Go comp for the deep equals types assertions and did a lot of
Testify, maybe?
No, Testify was like years early. It's not super popular. Maybe I can look it up later. But where I'm going with this is that they, I think, have a lot better connections with the Go team, and some of the things in that library, and that also happen to be in Go test tools, have actually made it into the standard library. So things like testing.tempter, like that's relatively new. The last couple of releases that came out of both Go test tools and this other library, I can't remember the name of, had something like that. T.cleanup came from this other library. This ability to, like, instead of doing defers, just registering with T.cleanup. So it is really cool to see some piece by piece, feature by feature, slowly moving in, and I like that approach to doing it. I think it's it's good for the standard library to be very conservative, keep it small, but still enable the community to experiment with things. Despite the Go community not always be super enthusiastic about experiments, it's fine. Like, there's enough people in the community that I think it works out.
There's a question we ask all our interviewees. It's a two-parter, and it's a very difficult one.
Okay.
The first one is, I'm forcing you. You can't say, oh no, nothing. what's the feature that's getting deleted from the Go language if you have to choose which one?
Yeah. So I think for me, hypothetically, because it's just hard to remove anything, but hypothetically, I think the thing I would remove is a small thing, and it's block definitions for variables and types. So you know how like imports, variables, and types, you can have them on a single line. You can say var, 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 type, type, type. Or you can block them together and put them around parentheses. Personally, I would imports. It's like nice, but like it's not super necessary. But for variables and types, I always want to like have types declared as separate things. So I would totally remove the support for defining 3 types or 10 types together, 10 variables together.
I think it might make ASTs a bit easier, and also grepping a little bit easier.
Yep.
Stuff like that.
Yeah, I find like refactoring, every time there's a block of like 5 variables, and if you have to change that function, like the first thing you have to go do is like restructure that thing, and then yeah.
Well, I'm sure that, even if we can remove it from the language, maybe we can make the Golang CI lint team add a very opinionated linter.
Yes, actually, there's a linter that does the opposite that I always turn off. It's like, no, stop forcing me to block these things. I want you to unblock them. Yeah.
Interesting. And now the second part, which is a lot harder. There are many other languages in the landscape. Obviously, in our podcast, Go, we really like Go.
Mm-hmm.
But let's say you had to steal a feature from a different language into Go. What are you taking?
Oof. I did not come prepared for this question. I didn't know this was going to be it.
Don't worry. The grades are only at the end of the semester. Don't worry.
I haven't dabbled too much in other languages. I'll say I did a little bit of Scala and Clojure functional type languages, and I really, even though I didn't, fall in love with the languages, I really appreciated the stuff I learned from it. So potentially, maybe something that makes functional operations a little bit easier to do in Go. I suppose the addition of generics actually maybe gets Go pretty
gets
close.
Us closer.
Yeah,
interesting. It's really funny because I think one of our past interviews, Mickey literally said what you said, but the other way around. What's the first thing you remove? Generics? What do you want more? I want more blocking. I want less keywords.
Interesting.
So, Daniel, this has been really instructive. Let's say people want to reach out to you. Is there anything where they can reach out, and what should they reach out about?
Yeah. Probably the easiest way to find me is on GitHub. You can find my email address on there. So either find me from the Go Test Some project or find me at D and then my last name, Nephin. That's my GitHub username. Yeah, if anyone's got interesting thoughts about the open source projects I've talked about, would love to hear from you. I'm also looking for a new role, so if you've got something that you think might be interesting to match my skill set, definitely reach out, and love to talk to you.
A rare opportunity to snipe a gopher directly from our podcast. I promise there are no fees introduced here from joining the podcast. Thanks a lot, Daniel. My cup of admittedly tea. It's you're based pretty far away, so I can't drink coffee. But it's almost empty. And thank you all very much for listening.
I've really enjoyed it.